والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ومولانا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم.
وعلى أهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم إلى يوم الدين. We remember the Imams, their martyrdom, their shahada. It is part of our culture. It is part of the instructions that we have from Ahlul Bayt, alayhimus salam, is that we incorporate when they have become martyred in our personal lives, when they are born, for example, we are joyous and happy. And we don't allow, for example, the calendar that we have, the Islamic calendar, to be forgotten. That we have to continue and to understand there is much barakat in naming, in remembering these Imams, alayhimus salam. Tonight we're going to talk about Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, the Imam who we are named Ja'fari because of this Imam. And when we study his life and we see some have gathered about 30 volumes of books from his ahadith, some of the narrators that he had and students he had learned tens of thousands of hadith from him. We ask ourselves this question. One is, how come Imam Sadiq alayhi salam taught so much while the other Imams taught less? Two, how come when we have so much knowledge from Imam Sadiq and we see him being the teacher of other big Sunni scholars like Malik, for example, or Abu Hanifa, how come he's not narrated in the book of Sahih Bukhari? Maybe there's like zero narrations from him. And the third, which is the topic of tonight's discussion, what is the methodology that Imam Sadiq alayhi salam used to teach? So that when we want to teach our own children, or that we are educators, that we can learn the same way and same mannerisms of teaching. When you look at the life of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, you see that there's a shift of power from the Umayyads, who ruled about 90 years, to the Abbasids, who then later ruled for 500 years. And later on, when the Abbasids, they rose up because of the dhulm that the Umayyads did, especially to Sayyid al-Shuhada alayhi salam, to Imam Hussein, to the family of the Prophet, they went and hunted them down. They went and found them, tried to kill them, and did, find the last of them, and then even went up and dug up their graves, because they said, why did you do this to the family of the Prophet? Why would you do so much dhulm? So now there is a shift in a time, a gap, where Imam Baqir alayhi salam and Imam Sadiq alayhi salam can teach. And they began teaching things that today we think are very clear for us. If we ask you, for example, how to make wudu, how to do salat, how to do the hajj, a lot of these ahkam is very clear for us. But back then it wasn't clear. Because they had not allowed hadith to be spread, Islam was being lost and Islam was being corrupted. And just like other religions that after the Prophet had passed away, the people were starting to do whatever they wanted to do, Islam was also being corrupted and changed. There's being tahrif. It's being distorted. Until Imam Baqir alayhi salam came and Imam Sadiq alayhi salam came. Look at some of the narrations. It says that Imam Baqir alayhi salam retaught people how to do hajj. Or sometimes you see even the life of Imam Ali alayhi salam, the people perform salat. And when Imam Ali alayhi salam performs salat, they're asking, what type of prayer is this? How is he praying? And then those who participated in Badr, in the Battle of Badr, said, Hada salatul Nabi. This is the way the Prophet used to pray. So I recommend for you to read one of the works of the scholar As-Sayyid Askari, who has the role of the holy Imams in the revival of religion. And he talks about that the Imams gave life to Islam. Islam that the Sunnis have, Shias have, whoever has Islam today, we're in debt to the Imams. And I want to ask you this question. Imagine Umayyads continued what they're doing. Imagine Abbasids continued what they're doing. What else would be there left of Islam? Our Imams were the teachers of the other students of ulama of Ahlul Sunnah. So therefore we say that all the Imams had this knowledge. And this knowledge that they had is from Allah. But Imam Sadiq alayhi salam had that opportunity to teach the people. And to have 4,000 narrators being able to learn from him, being able to, some of them, inshallah, if we have time, we'll talk about some students that Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, what the methodology that he had, he did tarbiyat of some students, very important students that he had. Two, why does Imam Sadiq not appear in the majority of Sunni works, even though he is the teacher of Malik? You know, the books, it says that when the Imams of Ahlul Sunnah are mentioned, Malik is like the star, MVP or whatever, the highest, for example, of, the scholars. And then he says that I have never seen, people have not heard, it hasn't crossed the heart of someone who is more afdal and who is better than Imam Sadiq in terms of ilm, for example, in terms of taqwa. The world has not seen anyone like him. In what sources does Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani brings in Tahdhib wa Tahdhib? This book that Imam Sadiq alayhi salam is showing that he is the afdal, he is the most knowledgeable. So we ask, why didn't you act upon Hadith al-Thaqalain? Why didn't you act upon Kitabullah wa Itrati, as the Prophet said in numerous reports? I leave for you the book and the family. Why do you not narrate from him? But you have thousands of other narrations from so many different people, some who barely even saw the Prophet, some of the Tabi'een that sold out themselves and went to the Umayyads. But Imam Sadiq is left out. And this for us is actually a big divergence that we see where we get our ahkam from, where do we get our aqaid from. Because brothers and sisters, what is the main source of legislation? Quran has hundreds of verses of ahkam, but in general, how to perform the ahkam. If I ask you how to perform the wudu exactly, for example, with all the conditions that wudu has, how to perform the salat exactly, with all the conditions that exist, could you bring me and just proof from the Holy Quran? No. Because if the Quran was going to be a book of law, it would be 110 volumes and nobody would read it. The Quran has ayat ahkam, but it is a book of reflection and remembrance and waking us up. But yet we see the Imams explained about Salat, about 10,000 narrations about Salat. How to perform Salat, 10,000 narrations. And as you see, Imam Sadiq at the end of his death, his martyrdom, he advises about Salat and that our shafa'at does not reach, our intercession does not reach those who take Salat weak and weaken Salat, those who do not take it serious. Those who do not take it serious. So therefore, it is because of the hatred that many had of the family of the Prophet that they would censor them, not allow the narrations to be in. The third is, what is the methodology of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam? When we look and we study this, we see that the Imam, first of all, is teaching us how a young person should be. And he is saying that when a person is young, he is either in two states. Now most maybe here are young that I'm seeing, for example, many are young, or they're at least young in heart, or they used to be young, for example. Says you should be in two states. في حالين إما عالما أو متعلم. The youth should not waste their time. The youth should take deen serious. The youth should study. They're either an alim, are you an alim, or are you a muta'allim? Which one? Are you studying or under the studying apprenticeship of a scholar, for example, learning from a scholar? فَإِن لَمْ يَفْعَلْ فَرَّطَ. And if he does not act, he has neglected. وَإِن فَرَّطَ ضَيَّأَ. And if he has neglected, he has lost. And if he has lost, وَإِن ضَيَّأَ أَثِمَ. And if he has lost, he has sinned. So the Imam is encouraging the youth. And I know that today when we want to teach the youth, their attention span is much different than it used to be 10 years ago, 20 years ago. I know that, for example, the culture is much different than it used to be 20 years ago. But we have to, in a way, encourage ourselves and encourage the youth to seek knowledge. I remember when we were, growing up, and before there was the internet and all this, that we'd have access to books. There's a few centers that would print books in the US. And we keep looking at that catalog to see, for example, which one of these we can order. And they would have to ship it like from New York or other places to come, for example. Or go on trips and we go to these bookstores in English, and they were the worst. Some of them were the worst translation you could find because we couldn't understand Farsi or Arabic. But you're limited to a few of these books and a few of these translators that had knowledge. And for us, it was very appealing, very interesting. But today, most majority of texts, if you take it, I'm not saying everything AI says is right, but if you take it to some of the apps and you use AI, it gives you a pretty much good translation, even older texts. Try it and see how the translation is. You can today find books in different websites all over. You can find classes. That I remember some of my friends, they would say we would walk for so long, they didn't have a car. Sometimes for someone and ask someone just to teach me something. And sometimes people would not treat them very nice. Say, actually today class was canceled. Why'd you come here, for example? Why'd you walk the whole way? And so it was difficult to study. But now, alhamdulillah, we have this opportunity with online, with books, with different classes and courses. My recommendation that before we talk about the methodology is the importance Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam and the Prophet gave to seek knowledge. The importance that Quran seek. It tells us to seek knowledge because you'll be given darajat. You'll be given rank. And one of the best actions that we have is seeking knowledge. So therefore, do not forget this. Always be progressing. Ask yourself always, what did I learn? For example, this week. A lot of times if you teach, you give zakat, for example, of that knowledge. Teach others. So what kind of methodology did the Imam have? One, we see that knowledge with ethics. Not just to learn. Today, people are confused because there's so much information out there. They just want to just take the information. No. And immediately, a lot of times you're speaking and they fact check you right there. Say, oh, is that right? When did this happen? They're checking and checking. Because we are addicted to just seeking knowledge just to seek it. But is that the correct methodology? Just to know, just to know? Sometimes knowledge can work against you. It's like a double-edged sword. How does it work against you? For this example of the story of Prophet Nuh alayhi salam. He had knowledge. He had an interesting amount of knowledge. A flood is going to come. And do you remember what the son of Prophet Nuh says? He has an idea. What is his idea? That I will go to the Jabal or go to the mountain. Why? Because have you ever seen it rain or storm and the mountain to be flooded? No. Because water or gravity will go to the lowest point. It's knowledge. He was a very knowledgeable person for that time. He was very knowledgeable. But that knowledge was a double-sided sword. We wish he didn't have that knowledge. Because that knowledge caused him to fight against his father, to fight against the hujjat of God, to fight against the Prophet of Allah, to fight against him and to reject, say, no, Father, I don't need to embark this, board this boat or this ship because I will be saved. It's impossible for a mountain, but yet it rained and rained and rained and rained until everything was covered. Or that region, at least in some of the other interpretations, that region was covered. So therefore, knowledge is a double-sided sword, just to get to know. Sometimes people on purpose, even though irshad or jahil is wajib, sometimes I know that they won't act, and I don't teach on purpose. Because I do not want to teach them something that I know they will not act upon, because now they're mas'ool and responsible. So we have to be careful that, do I just want to seek knowledge just to know? Or do I want to act upon that knowledge? I had this family member, he's a worshiper of Allah. He was a family member that really whatever he did was for Allah. The family can testify for this. He would read one of the books, like 40 hadith of Imam Khomeini, for example. He would read it. Us were like, oh, teach me, give me the knowledge. He would say, I would open it and just look at it and then close it. He said, that's enough for me. That's enough for me. He said, now I'm going to act upon that. Now I'm going to act upon that. But yet, me and you, and I'm telling myself too, it's so interesting to read and study, but at the end, okay, this part, did you act upon that? Did you act upon that? The entire purpose of 40 hadith, these akhlaqi books, is to implement it, not just to know it, to implement it. So the first thing that we are learning is that knowledge, not just to know, knowledge should have a purpose, so we can inshallah grow with that knowledge, we can act upon it. Listen to this tradition that we have from the Imam. اطلبوا العلم وتزينوا معه بالحلم. It says, learn, seek knowledge, but adorn it and make it look, adorn yourselves with forbearance, with hilm. That knowledge should do something for you. You should have hilm after you have that knowledge. You should have patience when you have that knowledge. You should have forbearance when you have that knowledge. Wal-waqar, for example, dignity. وَتَوَاضَعُوا لِمَنْ تُعَلِّمُونَ الْعِلْمِ. And then he says, don't only seek knowledge, have humility towards those whom you seek knowledge. Sometimes in the books of akhlaq or books, it says teachers shouldn't go to a student's house to teach. Why do you think teachers shouldn't go to the student's house to teach? And this is very common, for example. Why? Because that student should go and seek knowledge. The student should want knowledge so bad that they want to show respect to the teacher. They should come to the teacher. When the teacher goes to teach and goes to that person's house, he has, for example, made himself. Now, I'm not saying this is absolute, and if you do this, this is haram. No. It is, the purpose is that students should be humble in front of the teacher. This is something that, again, the culture, a lot of times you can teach religion and deen, but you cannot teach culture. We have to teach our children, we have to teach our communities that when you seek knowledge, to be humble towards the teacher. وَلَا تَكُونُوا عُلَمَاءَ جَبَّارِينَ. Then he says, okay, students, be humble, but then scholars, do not be tyrannical. Do not be a tyrannical scholar. Do not commit dhulm. فَيَذْهَبُ بَاطِلُكُمْ حَقِّكُمْ. Lest your falsehood wipes out your truth. So this part, and some of the methodology that we're talking about of the Imam, is that we are not the scholars, or we do not seek knowledge to help the oppressors. When you look at the difference between knowledge that was taught in the Umayyads, for example, that ruled, and you look at the system that Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam had, and how different it was in the Umayyads, the Imam very beautifully shares for us the difference between one type of knowledge that comes from, for example, the ulama that are jabbareen, the ulama that are tyrannical, and the ulama that are helping the madhlumeen, the ulama that are helping the people. The tradition is this: أما علمت أن أمارة بني أمية كانت بالسيف والعسف والجور. Do you not know? The tradition says the Umayyads, their government was established with sword, oppression, and injustice. This is who, set up, for example, the first seerah to be written, the Umayyads, that knowledge. Did you know that their rule was upon dhulm and injustice and killing, for example? Then he says that Ahlul Bayt alayhim wasalam wa anna imamatana bil-rifq. Don't you know that our imamat is through gentleness, friendship, gentleness, with ta'alluf, gentleness, wal-waqar, wal-taqiyya, wa-husn al-khulta, wal-wara, wal-ijtihad. Don't you know that our imamat is based on gentleness, harmony, dignity, taqiyya, good interaction, piety, and striving? That we were compassionate towards the people. And our government is this way. But the Umayyads, their government was based on the sword. So we learn from Imam Sadiq alayhi salam not to be of the scholars or not to seek knowledge, to helping oppression. That we see today actually that some universities like Harvard, they are right now suing, or they're very strong in the law school that they have. They are suing and fighting back and saying, you cannot tell us who, for example, to have employed here. You cannot tell us how to teach, for example. You cannot tell us how to run our university. That universities should be free. They should be able to objectively tell the truth. If they're always forced, for example, to tell which students are there, which teachers should be there, what, for example, can they protest against oppression and genocide or not, then you're always going to have universities to do whatever the government says so. But they should be independent. The universities should be independent because they have to tell the people what is right and what is wrong. Many people, they rely on the professors, rely on those who've studied, for example, political sciences, studied history, to tell people what's going on. But if they're just going to submit to the will of, for example, the administration, then you're going to see that you'll never have universities showing people the right thing to do, for example. So therefore, one of the methodologies is that knowledge should not be at the service of the oppressors. The ulama should not be at the service of the oppressors. The ulama should be free. And the Hawza, alhamdulillah, that is how it is. When you look at the Hawza, has always been a place of core water, a place where a person purifies themselves, has always been a place where it does not get funding, for example, from the government. It has always been a place where it gets funding by itself. It's not in need, so for example, they would cut it off, for example, their funding. It comes from homes, from the homes and the mujtahideen, the maraj. When you look at Imam Sadiq alayhi salam's general political activity that shows how he's going to rule, how he's going to teach, you see that at that time, the Abbasids take control. And you see that a person by the name of Abu Muslim Khurasani, for example, they even have a soccer team named after him, for example, Abu Muslim. And some of the ulama say, why did you put this soccer team named after him? You should change the name, for example, because he killed so many people. Abu Muslim Khurasani asked Imam Sadiq, and I'll tell you why, so you don't watch their soccer games, for example. I'm kidding. But Abu Muslim comes to Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, and he wants the Imam to rule. He will kill, he's a powerful person. I will destroy the Umayyads, and he does. And he writes the Imam to invite the people to love Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. The Imam in the tradition and history says he takes that letter and he asks for a lamp and he burns the letter of Abu Muslim. Powerful person, someone who, again, the Abbasid ruled for 500 years. But the Imam rejects and tells that person, tell your master, Abu Muslim, what you have seen. Tell him. And he says this in the tradition, Ma anta min rajali. This man is not of my men. This person is not of my men. Wala zaman zamani, and the time is not mine. That if you want Imam Sadiq alayhi salam just to seek power, they could seek power. But they do it with righteousness. They do it with justice. Not just anyone that can give them power. They want to win the hearts of the people. They want to do what is right. Then they will rule over the world. And that is when the Imam of the age will rule. But not someone who oppresses, for example, to be part of the movement of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. So therefore, you see that you have the methodology of not being at the aid of the oppressors. Maybe you could say this, and some of the scholars say, that what Imam Sadiq alayhi salam did was a revolution. It was an intellectual revolution, fighting against polytheism, fighting against ahkam that is wrong, akhlaq that is wrong. And therefore he was martyred for this path. He was poisoned for this path. That he did jihad tabyin. He explained the reality so much that the government decided finally to make him shaheed. Now we look also that akhlaq of being able to study. The Imam taught about akhlaq and said that knowledge, we said, and akhlaq are together. This is part of the other methodology. You see some of his students, like Abdullah ibn Abi Ya'fur, asks, well, who can I reach if I cannot see you? Imam Sadiq says, Muhammad ibn Muslim. Muhammad ibn Muslim was the great student of Imam Sadiq. Maybe 30,000 narration he had from Imam Baqir alayhi salam. Maybe he had 16,000 narration from Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. There's even occurrences where Abu Hanifa comes and asks Muhammad ibn Muslim questions. Not only Imam Sadiq, he asks the students of Imam Sadiq questions. Then you see that the humbleness that Imam Sadiq taught and trained his students to be humble. You see that Muhammad ibn Muslim was, crying when they called him, for example, they called, why don't you bring these two Ja'faris, for example, Ja'fariyan. Why don't you bring these two to attest in the court or whatever? Why don't you bring these Ja'faris? And he began to cry. They're asking, Muhammad ibn Muslim, why are you crying? He says that, where am I and where are the true Ja'faris, the true Shias? They call me Ja'fari. Sometimes we say this name to ourselves, yes, I'm Ja'fari, for example, I'm Shia. But did you ever think of it that Muhammad ibn Muslim would cry and wouldn't even attribute himself to be a true Shia, for example? And that is education and training for students to be humble, to not be arrogant and say, I'm a student of Imam Sadiq, for example, and to be arrogant. When you look at the life of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam himself, you see his education came with thinking about the poor, with helping the poor. You see, in the tradition, it has that a person by the name of, for example, when Imam Sadiq would put 50 dinars in a bag, and he gave it, for example, it says in the tradition, he gave it to me, he said, take it to this Bani Hashim person. He would do it discreetly. Give it to this Bani Hashim, give him money. And this person says, thank you so much for this money. As you know, may God reward you. But this person, for example, Ja'far ibn Muhammad, he gives me nothing, for example. He doesn't give me anything. But you learn that there was Imam Sadiq alayhi salam that was giving him money secretly. The other methodology that we learn is ta'allamu sidq qabla al-hadith. First, learn to be truthful telling, then learn hadith. Tell the truth. Because many times people take what they already believe and they take knowledge and they try to prove their points with knowledge. No, be an honest person, research completely, and then you'll learn, inshallah, the hadith. Or we have other traditions. Al-ilmu nurun yaqdhifuhu Allah fi qalbi man yasha. Knowledge is light that Allah places in the heart of whoever He wills. Don't just think of knowledge being book knowledge. Knowledge is nur and light. And if you act upon those things that you know, you will be given more knowledge. You'll be given real knowledge. So ilm is in a way ma'rifah, understanding Allah. Ilm is a nur that Allah gives to you. Ilm, you can say in one aspect of it is hikmah and wisdom to know what to do at that time. But if you never practice upon your knowledge, you'll never be given that true nur and true knowledge. Or we see sometimes Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, the way that he would teach and show his students is that he had a purpose for teaching. He had a goal. He would look into the distant future. In this beautiful hadith that they come and they see Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, Sudayr Sayrafi comes and sees that Imam Sadiq was sitting on the bare earth. He had a woolen cloak around him and he was crying like a deeply affected person. For example, like a mother who lost his child. Imam Sadiq, in this, I believe the traditions, Kamaluddin, was heavily crying. Grief had appeared, the narrator says, Sudayr Sayrafi, in the sides of his face. And the change had spread on both of his cheeks. For example, tears were rolling and he was saying this. Sayyidi, ghaybatuka nafat ruqadi. My master, your occultation has taken away my night's sleep. He was thinking of the Imam of the age. He was thinking of our time. It's an interesting hadith. The Imam Sallallahu and Kamaluddin was thinking of our time and was crying about what was going on, what's going to happen to occultation. This is how he's teaching, his students. وَضَيَّقَتْ عَلَى مِهَادِي, and has narrowed my bed from me, has snatched away my solace, my comfort from my heart. So they says, our hearts and minds were overwhelmed by the terrifying scene. So it was terrifying for us to see Imam al-Sadiq, our teacher, our Imam, crying like this. We thought this is a sign of the dreadful shattering or times that have been brought him a calamity. We say, oh, may Allah, O son of the best creation, never bring tears into your eyes. For what incidents are your eyes pouring and your tears raining? And what situation has led you to this mourning? Why are you crying? What's going on? Imam al-Sadiq took a deep sigh, that his chest expanded, and said that I looked in the book of Jafr. It was one of the books that the Imams had that tells the future. And this is the book that encompasses the knowledge of the deaths and trials and tribulations, and the knowledge, all that has been until the day of judgment. And then it says that which Allah, glory be to His name, has exclusively imparted to the Prophet and the Imams. It says, وَتَأَلَّمَتْ or تَأَمَّلَتْ تَأَمَّلْتُ مِنْهُ مَوْلِدًا Imam al-Zaman, I'm changing the word. وغيبته وإبطاءه وطول عمره وبلاء المؤمنين or بلوى المؤمنين في ذلك الزمان. I see at that time, I'm looking and seeing the disappearance of the Imam of Mahdi and its protraction, prolonging, and the length of his lifespan, and the trials of the believers after him, the time period that they'll have, and the generations of doubt in their hearts, and from the length of the disappearance, that people will be in shock, people will be in doubt during the time of occultation, and the apostasy of most of them from the religion, that most will remove themselves from Islam. And then he continues and says, he said, O son of messenger, Allah's messenger, dignify us, bestow honor upon us, share some of what you know from this knowledge. He says that the Imam of the age will have these three qualities, and then he talks about three qualities of Imam al-Zaman. So he's crying for our time period, that people will leave religion, the bala that they will face. And we've seen this these last 16, 17 months, what has been happening to the world. That the Imam has, his knowledge has so much foresight. He's thinking of us, and his knowledge was not a knowledge just to teach people at his time. It is timeless. We're 1400, 1200 years later. We're coming to the reality of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam's predictions. Then he talks about the Imam that will come later on, the 12th Imam, that he says that he will have three qualities, and he mentions that he will be foreordained. The Imam Mahdi will be, for example, his birth will be like the birth of Moses alayhi salam. How was Musa's birth? It was in a way that one way is that for example, it was hidden. There's no signs, for example, of his birth. He was hidden, he was protected, it was hatmi. Two, his disappearance will be like the disappearance of Prophet Isa alayhi salam. How was the disappearance of Prophet Isa alayhi salam? In a way, he just left. You have occultation, will be like that disappearance. In his longevity, will be like Prophet Nuh alayhi salam. So it's three comparisons to three prophets. One prophet, Musa alayhi salam, that they sought after him because he was the munji to try to kill him, but he survived. And because he is the wa'ad of Allah, he is the promise of Allah. Two, he is like Prophet Isa alayhi salam, that he was saved. And three, he will be like Prophet Musa alayhi salam. So you see that one of the other methodologies of the Imam alayhi salam is that his knowledge is not limited just for that time period. He is foretelling and foreseeing the situation and preparing the Shi'as for such a time period. He's educating them. So his students were not only those 4,000, there were those other people that today, even today, that we are reading this hadith, we are benefiting from. There's timeless. His knowledge is timeless. I'm going to mention a few of the tarbiyat of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, that he didn't just teach and go, that he really did tarbiyat, and he really trained his companions. One of them, I said Muhammad ibn Muslim. Another one is Aban ibn Taqlib. If you ask what are the students of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, what are some of the great ones? Aban was a mufassir of the Quran. Aban was a scholar of fiqh and hadith. He learned 30,000 hadith from Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. Aban ibn Taqlib. Another is Abu Hamza Thumali, that who is the student of Imam Zainul Abidin and other Imams. Student of Imam al-Sadiq, that he narrates, it is narrated in Kashi says that Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, when Abu Hamza al-Thumali would enter, when he would come, said, Inni lastariha, lastari, idhan ra'aytuk. I become calm, I become at peace when I see you. Imagine how a student can be, that the Imam will say, when I see you, I become at peace, I am calm, I become relaxed, for example, when I see you. Imagine if we can reach a status like that and be such a student for the Imam of the Zaman, inshallah, companion of the Imam of the Zaman. Another is Abdullah ibn Abi Ya'fur. Abdullah ibn Abi Ya'fur, Imam alayhi salam says, no one obeyed the commands of Allah thoroughly except Abdullah ibn Abi Ya'fur. Do you see how the Imam is mentioning this companion? He says, obeyed. He followed the rules. Not necessarily they did worship or, just read a lot of dua, read a lot of Quran. No, he obeyed. And then he gives the example. If you order Ibn Abi Ya'fur, if you order him, give him a pomegranate, anar, Farsi, give him pomegranate. And you tell him half of it, imagine how hard, because it has seeds. So it's very hard to do this. Open a pomegranate to Ibn Abi Ya'fur. Imagine you're all alone and you have this pomegranate. You open it and you tell him, for example, half of it is halal and half of it is haram. He would only eat the halal part. He would only eat the halal part, for example. So intricate. So, for example, sometimes a person might be a little hungry or something. There's one part, it's okay. I mean, you justify, or it's just, pomegranate. If this part, how can that be? So if you tell him like that, half of it is halal, half of it is haram, he will obey just like that. Or you have, other, of the companions of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam. But we'll, inshallah, finish tonight's lecture with mentioning these few. So what we learned tonight is that the revolution of Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam of knowledge was not just how we view knowledge today and just to learn and learn, is just to have book knowledge, but is to get that knowledge to, first of all, if you're young, to either be an alim or muta'allim, either one of these two. Two, to have waqar with these, have akhlaq. It is this not knowledge, have the correct behavior, have humbleness, as you see the students of Imam Sadiq alayhi salam have, not to be an aid to the oppressors. The ulama and scholars should not be an aid to the scholars, that it should be the opposite, that you should help the poor. For example, Imam Sadiq would take provisions and help the poor and also teach. And at the end we see that the foresight, the methodology that we understand from this, that Imam Sadiq alayhi salam's teachings were timeless and they were benefiting people that will come, the future generations that will arrive. We can dim the lights and remember Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam and cry for him. As we say in Dua Tawassul, Ya Aba Abdullah, Ya Ja'far ibn Muhammad, Ayyuha al-Sadiq, Ya ibn Rasulullah, Ya Hujjat Allahi ala khalqih, Ya Sayyidina wa Mawlana, Inna tawajjahna wa stashfa'na, wa tawassalna bika ila Allah, wa qaddamnaka bayna yaday hajatana. Repeat after me. Ya wajihan indallah, ishfa' lana indallah. I'm sure many of you have hawa'ij, needs, du'as for yourselves, for your brothers in Islam, throughout, what's going on throughout the entire world, that we're asking for peace, inshallah, and protection of the believers. Ya wajihan indallah, ishfa' lana indallah. Ya wajihan indallah, ishfa' lana indallah. Imam al-Sadiq, it is the last time that they are seeing him, and he asks Hamida to tell our Shia that our intercession will not reach those who take their salat lightly. Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam was similar to his mother Fatima Zahra alayhi salam in this manner, that when he was passing away, and you know how poison works. It works, some say, like being bitten by a snake. a person might twist and twirl, become very thirsty. A person might not even be able to talk. But the Imam used his energy that he had to teach us, the Shia, the sinning Shia, that to take your salat and make it an important part of your life. And that he was thinking of our salvation, because he's saying my intercession does not reach those. Meaning that Imam Sadiq, you were thinking of us, our hellfire, our heaven, to save us from the hellfire when you were poisoned, when you were at the end of your life, in one of the most painful parts of your life, you were remembering us. Your mother wasn't the same way, Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. That your mother Fatima Zahra, the tradition says, is Asma bint Umays. She enters the house of Sayyidah Fatima alayhi salam after her ribs have been crushed, after her arm has been hit. She is becoming more frail and frail after she cries day and night in Baytul Ahsan. She's listening, wondering, what is Fatima Zahra going to pray for? And she says in her prayer, listens and asks Allah, because of Imam Hassan and Imam Hussein, she swears by them, أن تغفر لعصاة الشيعة, to forgive the sinners of my Shia. It's such pain that Fatima Zahra alayhi salam had. She was thinking not of the good Shias, she was thinking of the sinning Shias. She was thinking of me, she was thinking of you, those who need the shafa'at of Ahlul Bayt. So they're similar in this way, Imam al-Sadiq, that at the time of death they were thinking of intercession, thinking of us. The other similarity that Imam Sadiq alayhi salam had, when you go to Medina and you see that because of the teachings and the power that the Imam had, they said that we will set his house on fire. And they set Imam Sadiq alayhi salam's house on fire. He is similar in this way to his mother Fatima Zahra alayhi salam, because also Ihraq al-Bayt was done for her house. How many narrations that we have from the Prophet that talks about how important this house is. How many times did he mention Hadith al-Thaqalain or Ayat al-Tathir, for example, about her, about this house, those who are individuals of this house. The tradition has and history has, Imam Sadiq, you were madloom, your house was set on fire, just how Fatima Zahra's house was set on fire. The tradition has that they came barging, they opened the door, they broke open the door. وَرَكَلَ الْبَابِ رِجْلِهِ, he kicked open the door. فَرَدَّهُ عَلَيَّ, and he took the door and threw it upon me. This is the daughter of Rasulullah. This is the last offspring of Rasulullah. Only 70, for example, a few days are passing from the Rahla of Rasulullah. Instead of sending condolences to Sayyidah Fatima alayhi salam, they come barging open. They open the house of Sayyidah Fatima. وَرَكَلَ الْبَابِ رَجْلَهِ فَرَدَّهُ عَلَيَّ وَأَنَا حَامِلٌ. And all this is being done while I am pregnant, expecting Muhsin, expecting a new Sayyid, a new Imam Zadeh, son of Imam Ali, son of Sayyidah Fatima. One that will have a lineage like how many scholars and how many great people we have from Imam Hassan, how many do we have from Imam Hussein. She is expecting Muhsin. وَالنَّارُ تُسْعَرُ, while the fire was blazing, وَتَسْفَعُ وَجْهِي, and my face was scorched. I'm not going to continue the rest of this musibah, but I'm trying to imagine what call, who is she calling at that time? Is she calling Ya Muhammada? Is she calling her father Rasulullah? Is she calling like the way that her daughter Zainab in Karbala, the tradition has, when she sees the bodies of her brother, of her children, of the family members, she says, Ya Muhammada, she claims, and asks how from Rasulullah, Salla alayka malikus sama. Ya Allah, we ask you because of the tragedy of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam, the dhulm that happened to Imam al-Sadiq, the martyrdom of Imam al-Sadiq, the dhulm that happened to Sayyidah Fatima alayhi salam, and Sayyidah Zainab and Ahlul Bayt. Answer our du'as, inshallah. Forgive our sins. Grant us knowledge that comes with it amal, inshallah, that comes with it nur, inshallah, comes with it akhlaq and adab, inshallah. Make us of the good companions of the Imam of the age, inshallah, and expedite his return with a salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.